Anse Tamara Gray.
All the way from the United States of America. She had a very long journey, long flight from the US to UK and then to Malaysia. And Alhamdulillah, she's here to share her words of wisdom, inshallah, through this topic Jumaat entitled Our Children
Nurturing the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Spiritual Intelligence. Sekarang boleh tanya.
Sekarang
boleh tanya.
Tanya apa?
Tadi tanya apa tadi? Baru sampai ke?
Oh, ya ke? Oh, okay. First and foremost, Assalamualaikum ya Sheikh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Kaifa halukum? Well, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
Hope you're fine, even though you have a very long flight. So how's your journey and flight to Malaysia?
It was wonderful because I was coming to Malaysia.
Ya, subhanallah. Ahlan wa sahlan. Nurahibukum insyaAllah ila biladina Malaysia. And how's your nasi lemak just now?
Yeah, the red spicy sambal.
It was wonderful.
Wonderful.
I loved it.
Yeah?
I love all things Malaysia so far.
Alhamdulillah, yeah. And you are Malaysian already.
Yes.
InsyaAllah.
Working on it. I'm working on that.
Alhamdulillah.
Saya akan bersama kita sepanjang jam ini untuk Jumaat kita akan bercakap tentang bagaimana kita boleh mendidik anak-anak kita mengikut sunnah Nabi sallallahu
alaihi wasallam. And Sheikh, for our mukaddimah, we have our children. They are growing up not only physically and mentally. They are growing up, getting taller, wiser, and getting matured. But then we are not going to forget the spiritual part or aspect to our children. Maybe as our mukaddimah, you can start it and let's share it to the listeners, inshallah.
Well, I think really that it's very important when we're thinking about the upbringing of our children that we don't forget their spiritual aspect. Because I think often parents around the world, we're very focused on them intellectually because we want them to succeed. We want them to do well. Exactly. And we want to show our families, look how well my kids do in school. And then we want them to go to a good university and do well there. And then we also, so that's their intellectual growth. And then we have their physical growth. I don't know what it's like in Malaysia, but in the United States, it's very fashionable to be very concerned about the chemicals and organic food and things like this. And the health of your children, again, very important. But what I'm concerned about is that we have caring, loving, devoted parents across the Muslim world. And really, I think one of the beautiful things about Muslim culture is that we are so concerned and devoted to these children that we're raising. But we're forgetting quite often the deep spiritual upbringing that is necessary to carry the ummah forward. And when you look at the Prophet ﷺ and the companions of that time, his companions, the early generation, the first generation, the Salaf, if you will, the primary intelligence or the primary important piece of growth was their spiritual life. And from there, from a strong spiritual life, their intellectual, physical, and emotional life developed. And so with the spiritual life as the core, the intellectual and emotional and physical aspects of their lives grew and grew in a healthy way. We need to, I think that we need to come back to a space where we recognize spiritual intelligence as something that is real and tangible and important.
Yeah.
And develop community spaces and community activities and family activities that nurture that spiritual intelligence of the child and spirituality, if you will, of the child, so that as they grow, when we are handing over to the next generation the spiritual carrying of the ummah and the world, because really as khulafa, the Muslim is responsible to be concerned not only about our communities, but the entire global issues and problems that we're dealing with. And these problems become very overwhelming if you don't have spiritual grounding.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I'm concerned about, and that's what I'm thinking a lot about these days, and working to help parents and the different women that I meet, the mothers that I meet, to develop
all over the world.
All over the world.
Surely.
Yeah.
Yeah, inshallah, that's a good mukadimah for our topic today. And when we talk about sebentar tadi, let me translate a little bit
Yes,
about
of
what
course.
have you shared for the mukadimah. Ramai antara ibu ayah kita sangat concern, sangat prihatin dengan makanan, pelajaran, pengajian anak-anak ni di sekolah, tentang apa yang nak dipilih, tentang kebijaksanaan anak-anak dalam akademik. Tapi bagaimana spiritual itu harus juga dibina, dan seperti yang Syekh sebutkan tadi, kalau spiritual ni okay, the rest will be okay. Aspek-aspek lain dalam akademik, kehidupan mereka akan jadi lebih baik lagi. So, let us continue our discussion today, Sheikh. When we say about handling of education, trainings, or other aspect to the world for our children, sometimes we not only handling it over, but we leave it to the teachers. Okay, teachers, their part is to teach our children, and not the parents at home. What
we pay you this much, so you have to.
Yes, sometimes they spend a lot of thousands for the children,
this kind of education.
But they just leave it to the teachers to teach.
Solely to the teachers.
So I want to just define education for a minute together.
Yeah.
Education is not just the teacher in the classroom with the students, and especially when we're talking about young children. Every single time and period of their life, they're learning. And I think I understood you say something in the translation, which is that if our spiritual life is okay, the rest will be okay. That's not 100% what I mean. What I mean is that I want the academics and the emotional health of our children to grow out of a strong foundation of spirituality. So there's a little subtle difference there. And the subtle difference is that we will still have to work hard in academics. We'll still have to work hard in knowing and understanding our own personality and our emotional growth so that we can have healthy relationships. But when they're rooted in spirituality, they're rooted in it's like a tree growing in a place that is healthy, as opposed to a place where if a storm comes and blows it away. So with this concept, if I can respond to your question now, it doesn't concern me so much where the children are learning their academics. That is something to discuss for academic purposes. What concerns me more is, what are we doing as parents to give them muscle memory, if you will, about a deep spiritual life. So if I can give you an example of prayer. The Fajr prayer is a prayer that across the world people are missing like crazy nowadays. But if you look at your grandparents, my guess would be that they weren't missing it, that they didn't miss Fajr a lot. If I look at the Syrian deep older culture, the elders didn't miss Fajr. They didn't miss Fajr prayer. They were up for Fajr. They were up before Fajr praying. What changed between what was happening there and what's happening today? And I think there's a lot of answer to that and a lot of nuance, and it's not a simple answer. But I think one thing that is very important in thinking about that is, how are we building the spiritual education, and that gets to that meaning of the word education, at home, so that the experience of Fajr prayer is not mother or father yelling at me to get out of bed, but rather a beautiful experience where I want to get up, I want to join my family, I want to drink the hot chocolate or smell the beautiful smells of Fajr and have that beautiful embracing feeling. And somehow as parents then, I want to educate my child in this example of the Fajr prayer, it's just an example, that this piece of spirituality is very important for their development and their education. So all of that's just a piece, and I can talk about the same thing in all different aspects of spirituality, but Fajr is one example.
One example.
I totally agree with you. When we talk about Fajr prayers, Subuh prayers, it seems like been isolated from our daily routine. It's not. It's like when you wake up early, it's like this is.
It's for the school or for the work, not for this Fajr prayer.
Fajr prayer itself.
And luckily, when weekend come, and then we wake up not as early as
Yeah.
during our weekdays for schools and work, right?
Tadi Syekha ada bercerita tentang bagaimana solat subuh yang sememangnya perlu disuburkan, macam Syekha terangkan, nenek kita, atuk kita semua dulu bangun solat subuh, malahan sebelum subuh lagi dah bangun, kan? Jadi cipta satu pengalaman indah yang perlu kita suburkanlah kepada anak-anak kita, demi untuk melihat spiritual, the inner growth from our children. But Syekha, some parents, they are more interested in fulfilling their child's piano lessons, okay, than the spiritual aspect of their children's education. What's your take on that? I mean, it's good. The piano lessons is our skills on playing piano or whatsoever, but sometimes they forego the spiritual education for the piano lessons.
Imbalance there.
Yeah.
Imbalance of that.
Now, I think that if we think of life as a banquet, okay, like a buffet table, we make a mistake in thinking that on this buffet table where, there's rice and there's, I don't know, the different Malaysian dishes, but, there's
Nasi lemak,
chili, something here, and there's
right.
something else here, and all this. What is one of our problems today is that we're looking at that and saying, okay, I want to give my child piano lessons. That's this side dish. And I want to give my children Islamic lessons. That's this side dish as well. And I want to give my children sport. And that's this side dish. But we have to change the paradigm.
Okay.
The table is their spiritual learning. The whole table. So whatever you put on the table should add to that. So if I have my child in music lessons, then that should be part of their spiritual upbringing, is they should understand that whatever we do it with itqan, for example. Whatever we do it with perfection. We want to make it with excellence, is a better word, with excellence. And whatever we do it for Allah, for the ummah, to help others, to improve ourselves. So whatever side dish we put on this banquet table, all of that is about the spiritual intelligence and spiritual upbringing of children. Islam is not a side dish. It's the whole meal.
And the table itself.
The table, it's actually the table. It's the foundation.
Everything.
And that's what I mean by, if my child is growing up and has an internal muscle memory of ibadah, of worship, of feeling that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of loving the Quran. In Syria in the 80s or 90s or something like that, there was a time when there wasn't a lot of Quran being read. Maybe this was the 70s. And an elder woman that I know through someone, she said that when she was a teenager, she was afraid of the Quran because the only time she ever heard it was when someone died. So that was a part of spiritual upbringing where they taught children that Quran is only for death. Now, that was in her family. But in the same way, if Quran is happy and exciting and we're happy about it and proud of our children and making the experience of learning Quran a blessed and fun experience, then that becomes part of that deep memory, which they will continue to go back to even in times of difficulty when they're older.
Wah, lovely, beautiful, subhanallah. Itu yang Syekh sebutkan tadi, bagaimana kalau yang Luke tanyakan bagaimana pendidikan yang kita pilih-pilih untuk anak kita. Pendidikan Islam itu seharusnya to be the main table, the table yang menjadi foundation ataupun asas pada hidangan dalam makanan yang kita nak nikmati, bukan sebagai side dish yang Syekh sebutkan, sampingan-sampingan dengan pendidikan yang lain. Jadi bila pendidikan spiritual ataupun Islam itu menjadi hidangan utama, bukan hidangan utama, table, the main course, the table itself. Jadi yang lain insya-Allah akan turut terbantu. Dan bagaimana Syekh sebutkan di hujung tadi, bagaimana seseorang yang sebelum ini dikenali takut dengan Al-Quran kerana Quran is only for death, dibacakan saat orang mati. Tapi bila kita faham dan sedar diajarkan Quran itu membentuk kegembiraan kita untuk membacanya, mengamalkannya, pastilah ia menjadi satu good foundation for everybody in everything.
Kita nak menjadikan pengajian Quran sebagai sesuatu yang boleh kita suka, yang kita teruja untuk belajar. Itu yang disebutkan oleh Syekha sebentar tadi.
Okay. Anda juga boleh ajukan soalan, our beloved brothers and sisters, and may ask any question to Syekha Tamara Gray today, insyaAllah, through our phone line 0362051500 ataupun menerusi Instagram dan Facebook kita. Kita saksikan ramai hari ini yang turut menyaksikan secara langsung di live Facebook. We also have our listeners all the way from Singapore listening and watching you through our live Facebook and all over Malaysia as well, insyaAllah. So, soalan boleh anda terus ajukan kepada Syekha Tamara Gray berkaitan dengan bagaimana pendidikan anak-anak itu untuk kita suburkan bersama-sama dengan kebijaksanaan spiritual Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Before we take a break for a moment, Syekha, I'd like to ask you one question. What inspires you? What inspired you to become a Muslim? Since 1985.
Oh, this is a short answer or the long answer.
In the middle.
In the middle.
Inshallah.
So, are you asking me what inspired me in 1985 to become a Muslim? Or are you asking me what continues to inspire me?
Wow.
In 1985.
In 1985.
We can start with that. What happened?
So the short answer to that is I was always a religious person.
Okay.
And I was a practicing Christian. And in the summer of 1984, I had a spiritual crisis where as a Christian, there is this concept of God as a man. God the Father, God the Son, Jesus is a man, right? The Trinity, but the thing that bothered me in the summer of 1984 was this idea of praying to a man. I had a lot of feminist leanings, and I just felt like, why am I praying to a man? It didn't make sense to me. Okay. And so from that, what I would call spiritual crisis for a Christian, it was a spiritual crisis for me. I went on a road of searching, which is a long story, but in the end, what inspired me in Islam really, then the end of December of 1985, was the concept of hijab. And it was hijab that really, I wanted to learn about all religions, but I didn't want to learn about Islam because I thought Islam was oppressive to women. And then I learned about hijab and I actually just heard about it. I sort of ran into hijab and learned about it in the roundabout way. And I thought, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing. Hijab is a way to bring equity to society and to remove some of the oppression that we were dealing with in the 1980s, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was this door of hijab that I walked through. I put on hijab before I became a Muslim.
Subhanallah.
Yeah. And then I learned about Islam a little tiny bit. I bought a mushaf, a Quran, and asked somebody about prayer and got some information about that, and then went and I had the actual inspiration. So the word inspiration is the word that I'm holding on to here, was a dua that I made as I was praying. I was
before conversion.
So yeah, I wasn't a convert yet, but so I bought this Quran and I opened it up, and subhanallah, the hijab had attracted me to Islam, and I opened up to in Surah Al-Ahzab, Inna al-Muslimeen wal-Muslimat والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات. You know it, the 10 qualities of the human being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the male and the feminine, genderized in Arabic. And I was taken aback. I was like, wow, there's true equity and spiritual equality in Islam, even if the Muslims don't know it. That's what I said to myself at that time. And so I prayed 2 rak'ahs, and in my last rak'ah, in my last sujood actually, I asked God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I was scared then, you get scared. So it's one thing to leave a religion, it's something altogether to commit to a new one that's very different. And so even though that verse really moved me, and even though I was at that space where I think Islam is correct, but I was afraid. So that's why I prayed these 2 rak'ahs. And in the last sujood, I said, Ya Allah, oh God, I didn't say Ya Allah because I wasn't even a Muslim yet, but I said, oh God, if the words of this Quran are yours, then I'm a Muslim. But if they're not, I need you to tell me, because I really don't want to do this. So that's my funny little dua there. And
istikhara,
it's sort of like istikhara, subhanallah, And so you say in Arabic, نزل علي حال. I knew the Quran was the word of God. And so for me, when I got up from that prayer, I was a Muslim. Then I met Muslims, and that's another story. But for me, I was that's the main beginning of my journey right there.
Is it Surah Al-Ahzab ayat 35?
Al-Ahzab.
إن
المسلمين
المسلمين
والمسلمات
والمسلمين
والمؤمنات قانتين
إلى
والقانتات
آخره.
continues. Yeah,
Ayat
exactly.
surah Al-Ahzab ayat 35 menjadi inspirasi untuk Syekha Tamara Gray. Ya, berdoa pada Tuhan sebelum masuk Islam dan ditunjukkan kalau ini ayat Allah, maka ya, aku akan memeluk Islam. Dan later on, you spend about 20 years in Syria, in Damascus, Damashq, Syria, for traditional learnings of Islam with all the mashayikh there, and subhanallah. Here you are now,
Here I am in Malaysia,
sharing
subhanallah.
your words of wisdom, subhanallah, today for our topic Jumaat in IKIM FM. Gonna take a break for a while, Syekha, and we're gonna be back for more, insyaAllah, with Syekha Tamara Gray.
Okay, dan sahabat sekalian, jangan lupa untuk tanyakan soalan anda di Facebook dan juga Instagram, dan juga hubungi kami 0362051500 dan panggilan anda insyaAllah akan disambut.
InsyaAllah. Terus bersama kami di Warna Pagi.
IKIM FM, pilihan utama anda.
I went and I was at university, and I asked.
Can we share this online?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. So I went to this young man. I knocked on his door. I was wearing hijab. I knocked on his door.
Sorry, Syekha, we're gonna.
Be back. Okay. For our second round.
Some other time, no
Inshallah.
If you want to share on air,
let's see where it goes. You guys, you guide it, and then you'll let me know whatever you want. Okay.
IKIM FM, pilihan utama anda. Alhamdulillah. Terima kasih untuk sahabat-sahabat sekalian, dan terima kasih to our Syekha Tamara Gray. Dan sebelum kita teruskan, before we proceed with our second round for this topic, let us share the schedule ataupun jadual Syekha Tamara Gray di Malaysia. Esok ada program Handling Boundaries di Masjid Wilayah 14 Januari, only especially for sisters only, yang dibawakan oleh Fajar Sisters. Dan 16 hari bulan ada satu perkongsian di Hak Sungai Penchala, Pusat Komuniti Hak Sungai Penchala, membawakan tajuk Female Scholarship, History and Future. Dan ada satu lagi program, kalau boleh kita kongsikan satu tarikh, 17 Januari di The Cube Academy Islam University Melaya, 17 Januari, Balancing Deen and Dunia, Modeling the Prophetic Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Community. Itu antara yang boleh dikongsikan. Anda boleh terus ke Rabata, Malaysia untuk jadual lanjut Syekha Tamara Gray.
Despite your 30 hours of flight from US to Malaysia, but you have a tight schedule over here.
Subhanallah.
And thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you.
For your first kuliah in Malaysia. Subhanallah.
That's right, yeah.
Hello, wassalam.
Okay.
Baik.
Right, Syekha. Okay, Rasulullah SAW is our prime role model. And how do we take our children's hand and guide them to achieve that spiritual, the importance of being the best Muslim in the world,
in accordance to our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam?
I think for children, sometimes it's better to introduce them to the Prophet ﷺ through the eyes of those who we know loved him. So if we can share the stories of the companions with our children, not just their stories, but their relationships that they had with the Prophet ﷺ, and teach them about loving him through their love, I think that sort of walks through the window of love instead of trying to shove them through a door that they don't understand. Yeah. It's difficult for children to love someone that they don't know. I mean, I think it's difficult for anyone. And unfortunately, when we teach about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know how it is in Malaysia, because I've not seen, but generally speaking around the world, when we teach about his life, we sort of sandwich his life in two thin pieces of bread of his life and this big filling of battles. So if you ask children around the world, tell me about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they'll say Badr, Uhud, Khandaq. Well, these are important. Yeah. These are important, but they're not his life. And they don't teach children who he was.
Yeah.
And even when we teach Badr, we should be teaching about the Prophet ﷺ's entire night before
Strategies.
standing. No, not strategies.
Right.
Standing in prayer.
Oh yeah.
The entire night previous to this battle that was going to happen. And the emphasis for our children should be about where do we seek help when we are facing something that feels overwhelming. So Badr was an overwhelming experience. Previous to Badr, they didn't know they were going to win. And it was, imagine that situation that they were in, that state. And the Prophet ﷺ stood all night, standing, begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. To such a degree that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu got concerned about him and was comforting him. So what do we learn? For our children, we want to stop, I think, when they're young, emphasizing battles and military stuff. This is typical history. I mean, this is normal. And I'm not saying, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying we don't teach it. Of course we teach it. But in upbringing and in taking the Prophet's hand, sallallahu alaihi Muhammad, in taking his hand, we have to give them, our children, the hand of the Prophet as a whole being, as his whole prophetic being. He wasn't just a military strategist or a leader of a government or things like that. He was a very spiritual man, of course.
Maknanya subhanallah, that's great. Not only the strategies of the battles and the infos about battles, but the good things beside or beneath the strategies in the battles, right?
Yeah, so I want to be careful of saying the good things besides. I think words, we have to be really careful with words when we talk about the Prophet ﷺ. And what I'm saying here is that when we want to guide our children to see the Prophet ﷺ as their greatest mentor, as the greatest example of the spiritual life, we have to do that first through looking through the windows of the eyes of those who loved him the most. And secondly, when we look at his life, to get beyond sort of Western history, which is sort of the way we've developed looking at him, and instead look at the whole story, look at who he was. And I use that example of Battle of Badr because how many of us teach our children that when you're facing something difficult, look what the Prophet ﷺ did. He spent an entire night in prayer. He's a prophet. And, and what are we doing when we're facing difficulty? Are we turning to Allah with that, on one hand, the feeling of confidence that he'll answer, but at the same time, that spiritual muscle that knows that turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only going to help us in sort of a dunya way, but is going to nourish us so that can last a long time.
Walaupun Rasulullah SAW seorang Nabi, seorang Rasul, tapi mengambil masa sepanjang malam untuk solat dan memohon bantuan daripada Allah SWT.
Di saat sangat genting seperti dalam keadaan in battles ataupun dalam peperangan, munajat seorang Rasul itulah ditunjukkan bagaimana mendekatkan seorang Nabi, Rasul kepada Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala dalam memohon bantuan, dan kisah-kisah cinta pada Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ini hanya boleh disampaikan oleh mereka yang cinta, those who loved the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, hanya boleh disampaikan oleh mereka yang betul-betul cinta kepada baginda Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Subhanallah. Dan harus we should start that from at home.
Yes. And they should see in our own eyes the love of the Prophet ﷺ.
The parents' eyes.
In the parents' eyes. And we should get excited about things that they do when they memorize hadith, things that they do when we should as a family have time when we say salawat together. When we think about the Prophet ﷺ, they should see in us. And I actually think that Malaysian culture is probably really good at that, from what I know.
We have parents who are spending some of the day together with their families. The dad will tell stories about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to the children and families as well. And we hope that this togetherness and in sharing their love to beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ will be one of the way in building the foundation, good foundation.
Alright, insyaAllah.
Okay.
Kita ada pemanggil.
Alright. We have a caller.
So, Cham dari Subang ada sesuatu nak dikongsikan. Silakan.
I'm very much interested about your points about enlightening children about the Fajr prayer. But then again, it's difficult for parents to maintain composure when we try to teach the children about this beautiful ritual, there's got to be a point when we suddenly lose our patience and appear as not so pleasant parents. So how then do we balance between getting them to get used to this routine of enjoying and actually feel the blessing of Fajr instead of nagging them and losing our patience? And so that one day they too realize that getting up for Fajr is a beautiful beginning of the day.
Alhamdulillah,
Thank you very
you're
much.
most welcome. Okay, maybe Sheikh Tamara can
Yeah,
enlighten.
this is this is every mother on the
Issue.
planet, every Muslim is an issue
And
that we're
every
all
day.
and every day. I think I'm going to say three things. First of all, let's start really young. And sometimes when we have very young children, for a mother, you feel like, I want this alone time. And you don't really want them to wake up because they're like 3 or 4 years old. And you're like, just stay quiet. Don't make any noise so they'll stay asleep. And we need to start here with sort of getting over that and letting them wake up when they're 3 or 4. And what I mean here is not necessarily forcing them to wake up, certainly not, but that should be a time of awakeness in the family. So the whole house is awake. It's not just this really quiet tiptoe around. Some people are sleeping.
Yeah.
No, it's an awake, the whole family is awake, and it becomes really normative that the family is awake at that time. And so that's the first thing I would say. And then as they get older, if the family's always awake, it's going to be much more difficult to be asleep. That's one thing. And if a problem does develop, the problem is probably not going to develop until probably about 10, 11, 12. That age is when children start to test you. I would say there are a couple of different things to do. One is that during the day, when there's no feelings and no one is frustrated and no one is angry and everyone is in control, that's the time to talk to our children. And in the language of my problem as a parent. So instead of sort of throwing blame, I'm saying, look, I have a problem. I can't see you asleep at the Fajr time. I just can't. I help me solve this problem. Of course, the children are going to say, well, let me sleep. But we say, well, no, that's just not a solution. So give me another thing to do to help you wake up. And if we take solutions from our children and they say, well, if I can drink, I don't know, coffee or something in the morning, or I can drink tea, or I can drink Coke in the morning, or whatever it is, juice or something, that might make me feel better. Or if I can, children actually, oftentimes they have really good solutions. Not as a reward, as to help them. What can I do to help you wake up? So if I'm saying to my 11-year-old or my 14-year-old or my 15-year-old, look, you're struggling to wake up. This is a problem for me. I'm getting angry and I don't want to be angry in the morning. How can I help you wake up? And they say, the first answer might be, well, don't wake me up. Well, that's not okay. That's not an acceptable answer. So then maybe they'll say, well, don't wake me up at the first time. Wait 15 minutes. You say, okay, I can do that. Or maybe they'll say, I want to be able to drink coffee in the morning. And maybe you're anti-caffeine as a parent. Well, here's a place where you make a decision. Am I going to choose the prayer, or am I going to choose my caffeine rule? Maybe you're anti-sugar. Maybe you don't have your children eating candy, but maybe they can eat it during Fajr time. Maybe there's something really delicious that your children love, and maybe nobody can eat it all day long, but in the morning, there it is. Maybe you're making cookies in the morning or something that children really like, and the whole house smells like it. Smell wakes children up as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so all of those kinds of things will help the child wake up. Now, if you get impatient and you're angry, remember that that's you with a problem and not the child. Walk away. I think it's better to walk away than to yell at the child, because if I walk away, even if my child misses Fajr, and we talk about it later, and most likely if your child misses Fajr, they're going to have a rotten day, because that's just the way it is. Who misses Fajr has a dull, dead day. It's just not the same. So the important thing is there, if your child misses it, to take that opportunity to point out to them all the terrible things happening to them throughout the day, and teach them that Fajr changes their day, that it's a fard. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood to say that I think that you should easily let your child miss Fajr. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying if you're about to lose your temper, walk away, get calm, maybe have somebody else in the family wake them up. Maybe bring them a tray of something instead of making them come. A tray of hot chocolate, or a tray of tea,
breakfast,
or a tray of chips or something that will wake them up, right? or something. You can do
Something to
fun things
motivate.
too, right? You can put the TV on. I mean, let's get creative. Put Facebook on and tell them all the things going on Facebook that they're missing. But or whatever it is. I mean, get creative and help them forward, and we just work on our own patience in that way.
Inshallah, it's going to be a shiny day after
Yes,
this
inshallah.
task will be
when you
done.
mentioned about the cookies, you reminds me of my mom's cooking. Cookies.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now,
Suddenly.
You'll have to get
So that
some
is
later.
one of the motivation to wake up our children early for Fajr.
Understand our
Inshallah.
children's nafs.
Mhm.
Understand that what they want. Every child is different.
So we need that time to.
And you are different and I'm different. Like we
Yeah.
all have a nafs, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you're not struggling with fajr, maybe you're struggling with tahajjud. But in all cases, find out what your nafs is. What is the thing that you want? And then say, okay, I only get that in the morning. Or make them pay. If their thing is money,
Mhm.
if they miss fajr, make them pay 1,000
Fine.
ringgit
Uh-huh.
or something.
Hmm.
Yeah, into some pot. And then that money maybe goes to charity or whatever. And every time they miss it, they have to pay. I mean, so find something where they're understanding the beauty
What
and the
they
connection
want.
of it, but also it's staying away from yelling and staying away from that.
Stay away from
Frustration.
being angry. And
Stay away from being angry.
creating
Stay away from
frustration.
the association of prayer time with anger.
Okay.
Especially for this
Yeah.
fardu or obligation for as a Muslim.
Right.
Avoid from being
Being
angry.
I try to do
So,
that.
InsyaAllah, dia you can try at home insyaAllah tomorrow. Itu jadi maknanya kita ibu-ibu, ayah-ayah kena tanya dengan anak-anak bagaimana how to wake up early for Fajar. Then they will have the answer and dari situ dengan jawapan itu kita cuba untuk adjust
Betul lah.
supaya dapatkan mereka.
Kadang-kadang bila kita kat rumah, kita rasa macam pukul 4 pagi itu terlalu awal untuk anak tu bangun. Tapi sebenarnya itu adalah waktu yang sesuai untuk kita bangun. Kalau dekat Mekah, kat Madinah, itu adalah waktu yang memang orang berbusu untuk ke masjid.
Masjidil Haram, Masjid Nabawi untuk menunaikan. Kalau kita tahu kelebihannya di situ, insyaAllah kita akan bersungguh-sungguh insyaAllah. That's the motivation and inspiration insyaAllah. We also have our listeners, another callers for their questions insyaAllah.
Cik Khairi dari Perak, silakan.
To maintain or to sustain our children that there is a need for every parent to instill or to educate the good values, good moral, and as well as to appreciate the Prophet struggle. So it is important in relation to ensure that our children will be able to memorize and to understand deeply or further about the Prophet struggle, and they will be able to understand it. So I would like to the panelists to clarify further about it. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Cik Khairi. Terima kasih. Can I have another one?
Okay.
Caller?
Ya, Puan Norma dari Bani.
Norma.
Silakan.
It's an honor to speak to you, Sheikha. My question is, when the children are young, we try our very best to bring them up within the spiritual journey, the right journey, the Islamic values, everything. But once they become adults, sometimes the challenges outside, even during the teenage years, the challenges outside, especially they adopt the Western values, so we lose to that Western civilization that that come to our children, that we see everywhere, when on the television, outside, and everywhere. So how do we overcome these challenges? Thank you.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, those
Good
are real.
questions.
The challenges are very, very real. And I think, first of all, we have to remember as parents the very difficult thing to remember, which is that our children are separate from us. They're separate people. And so while we have to work at their upbringing, we won't be able to control them. And that's a hard pill to swallow. We want to be able to control them. But to sort of inoculate them or give them that vaccination against all of that will come at them as they get older, it's the narrative stories and the experience, the spiritual experiences that will help them when they get older come back to what was original for them. So there's an Arabic expression, اللي بياكل فول يرجع للأصول, which is just a silly little expression that says who eats this kind of breakfast will always go back to their origins. And what it means is that what you're fed as a child remains important to you. even if you looks like you're eating, fancy steak and shrimp, you're still going to eat those breakfast beans. That's the meaning of the proverb. Yeah. So I think in this case, to respond to what the mother is asking, if the child is raised with those nice feelings about prayer and that spiritual growth at home, even if they spend some time, God forbid, but even if they spend some time distant or attracted by those ideas that seem so attractive in the world of academia, they'll still have their roots in their spirituality. So if we're patient and we work and we don't cut them off and we pray for them constantly, inshallah, they'll come back. And just on that point of praying for them, the mother's heart, the prayer of the loving heart is answered. And we have the qada al-haja bil-layl, this prayer of need at night. And if you pray that at night, the qada al-haja, the prayer for need, at night, and you pray it with Surah Yasin, you have the qalb al-Quran, ma qalb al-layl, ma qalb al-mu'min. You have the heart of the Quran with the heart of the believer with the heart of the night coming together to make dua. And if you add to that the heart of the mother, this is a very effective dua. No one should pray it thinking I'm going to pray it once and see the result the next morning when I wake up. But we should all pray it when we have children who are astray, when we have children who are struggling. We should make that a primary priority of prayer, that we're getting up at night, doing qada al-haja, praying for our children to fall in love with the Quran again, to fall in love with Islam again, to find the holes and the weaknesses, because all of that which is dunya is silly. But we need them to see it as silly and to see their spiritual life as real.
Regardless any time or an era with technologies, these are all the challenges that we are facing nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And dengan panduan yang telah Syekha sebutkan tadi itu, moga-moga dapat membantu ibu-ibu sekalian untuk bagaimana membantu anak-anak, apa-apa pun terjadi di masa hadapan in future, they will get back to the origin or asal usul mereka yang diajarkan.
Mana katanya kita sebagai ibu bapa ni yang adalah guru yang pertama mengajar mereka.
First teacher.
We are the first teachers
at home,
of our children.
The parents.
Walaupun berada di luar, terpisah daripada kita dan sebagainya, tapi insyaAllah mereka akan kembali semula kepada kita untuk mendalami ilmu Islam.
So Syekha, what about being istiqamah in teaching our children towards in nurturing the Prophet's spiritual intelligence, like our brother Khair asked
about? Well, certainly the istiqamah, by istiqamah, if we mean by istiqamah that we are good examples for them, is that what we mean by that? Is that what you're...
How do we, consistently...
How can we be consistent in our istiqamah? Well, I think that if we are consistent in our feelings, and when we make mistakes, we tell our children that we made a mistake, because that's what Tawbah is for. I mean, there's no human being that's perfect. And if we can say astaghfirullah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also have to learn to apologize to the people around us. And even if we're not apologizing to our children, but we're pointing out, oh man, I got angry on the phone with that person from the telephone company. I shouldn't have done that. I should have been patient. And we share that with our children, that when we feel bad about behaviors that we behaved in front of them, I think that's important. It's really important to become the mentors and the qudwa, the examples for our children. And in that is remembering that they are watching every single thing we are doing, everything. And we're human, so we're not going to be perfect. And so we have to accept both of those, both that they're watching us and that we're not going to be perfect. So we have to learn how to show our best hand to the children. So there's in Islam, we have, as far as charity goes, we have a rule, which you should give with your right hand, or let's say a principle rather than a rule. You give with your right hand, so your left hand doesn't know, correct?
Yeah. Right.
So in tarbiyah, in raising children, that changes. Because you give with your right hand, you take your left hand, you grab your kid by the scruff of the collar, drag him over here and say, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing.
Oh, wow.
And I say that, of course, so that's a little bit funny. You don't exactly do it like that. But there's a place for spiritual aloneness between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as a parent, You have to be demonstrating, look, we're giving charity now. Look, we're praying tahajjud now. Look, we're doing this now. And you do it in love and fun and all of this so that they have those memories and they're looking up to you. And you say, look, I made this mistake. And I'm doing istighfar. And I'm asking Allah to forgive me. And I'm counting on Allah's forgiveness as well. I think we need to be very positive and joyful in our faith at home. So that they look to that as the space of joy and the space of good feelings.
Let them see what we do. Let them see.
Let them see it, and
even
feel
when,
it.
when we are committing any mistake.
Either way, and we're going to make mistakes. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? I mean, I'd like to meet the one who doesn't, because mashallah.
Me too. But children, surely they are the best copy. I mean, what would they witness through their parents, they will slowly, follow and
follow. And so if they see us making tawbah, they'll do that too when they make mistakes. So in that place where because one of the dangers of this life, this society, is that when children stray, they stray very far. And if we haven't given them the tools for coming back, they may feel that Allah doesn't want them. They may feel that there is no way back. And that is not something we want to do. We want to make sure they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Ghafur Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Tawwab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the repentance of those who repent. They need to know it so that they don't feel like they're kicked out.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Repent all the time. Comment from our listeners on Instagram.
We also have our listeners from Sydney.
Wow.
Listening and watching, viewing.
Busana
live.
Saizara, she said, love the topic today. It needs a lot of sacrifice to build the spiritual intelligence in us. A lot of negotiation between parents and their children. Be calm, hold our impatience and tendency to get quick results. Jazakallah khairan.
Okay, Alhamdulillah, itu dia respon. Positive response from our listeners and viewers as well. Maybe we have about 5 minutes before ending this discussion. Maybe Sheikh have some advices and some important words or conclusion as well.
I think that we didn't, when we're talking about spiritual intelligence, this is something that the academic world tried to study in the 80s. They tried to study this thing called spiritual intelligence. And because you can't quantitate it, you can't do a quantitative study about spiritual intelligence, they sort of they walked away from it a little bit, and they gave it new names, and some called it moral intelligence, some called it existential intelligence. But in the end, as Muslims, we have a unique opportunity to understand the essential importance of spiritual intelligence. And if we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ before his prophethood, before the wahi, before revelation, we see in him an incredible capacity for understanding the world of the unseen, just as a human being. And that is part of what we want to do for our children, is give them the capacity to understand the world of the unseen as just as real as the seen world. If we can do that for them, we've given them a great gift that will help them throughout their life. And the last thing, the reason I use the word intelligence is because we have to understand that intelligence can grow and be developed. It's not something you're born with and that's it. And there's studies out there. The whole concept behind neuroplasticity tells us that the brain can grow and change. And because we know that the soul is who we actually are, and the body is what we have. Right? So our soul is who we are. That's what does. That's the unchanging self. The body changes. Right now, my body is not the same body I was when I was 10 years old. All the cells have changed. I mean, I don't mean because I'm taller or fatter or whatever. I mean because my cells have literally changed and they're new cells. But my soul has never changed. And so if we can give that to our children, that the essence of their self, their spiritual intelligence is that the essence of the self is in the part of themselves that Allah created, that soul that he then put into this body that is ever changing. And the body, we need it. We need this body, so we need to keep it healthy. We need this body so we can do good works for Allah. Yes. But in the end, our essential self is that soul that needs the nutrition of a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to grow in a healthy way and to grow into this everlasting living that we want. Because in the end, we want to be with our children, not only here, We want to be with them in Jannah.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
So
Amin.
that's the most important piece.
Decoration.
Sorry, go ahead.
Subhanallah,
Amin.
subhanallah. So
Mhm.
maybe you can share with us what are among the way or tips to get the essence, I mean the essential through our soul, maybe from reading of Quran, from Quran Karim as guidance, Sunnah of the Prophet.
So every childhood stage is going to have something different that you're going to do to help them
Okay.
reach that
Right.
place. I think as young children, certainly they need to be memorizing Quran and reading Quran and memorizing. The memorization of Quran is actually a really important piece of growing that inner self that can understand the unseen world. I think also that as children grow older, we want to make sure that they learn to tell the difference between a place of angels and a place that doesn't have angels. That will help them when they go to college be repelled from places that are places of sin, because they'll begin to feel that when I'm in a place of angels, I feel good. But when I'm in a place of shayateen and jinn and all this, I don't feel good. So I don't want to put myself in that place because that doesn't help me. It doesn't help me grow. So by helping them feel that out and be like, don't we love to go to the
Inshallah.
mosque? It feels so good here. Look when we go to Tete's house or our grandparents' house, how it feels in her house. Look at how it feels. Oh, now we're at the mall. We got to get shopping, get home, because here in this place of dunya, there aren't so many angels here, for example. And so helping our children through our talk to recognize those spiritual aspects of life that are so important for growth.
So go and find the angels.
Yeah, go find
Places
the
that
angels.
have
Yeah.
angels
Find
and
the angels.
positivities as well.
Yes.
Subhanallah.
Yes,
Itu dia panduan yang
positivities.
sangat berguna yang Syekha Tamara Gray kongsikan tadi untuk terbiatul aulad ataupun mendidik anak-anak ini, bagaimana mereka membesar secara fizikal, harus juga tidak dilupakan spiritual dan pembentukan soul ataupun jiwa pada anak-anak itu harus dibentuk khususnya oleh ibu bapa. Sama-sama lah kita usaha ya.
Thank you very much, Syekha Tamara Gray,
Thank you.
for the great topic,
Yeah.
the great explanation to the parents out there and the children who are listening today.
And not to forget, we also have our listeners from all the way from California, listening very well and clearly today's
Alhamdulillah.
discussion. Thank you, Sheikha.
That's exciting.
Hope you
Enjoy stay here in
yeah,
Malaysia.
enjoy stay in
Thank you.
Malaysia.
I know I will. I'm
Please do not
excited.
forget us in your dua as well,
Yeah.
inshallah.
Inshallah. Allah yaftah alaykum.
Inshallah.
Thank
Jazakumullah
you.
khairal
Thank you very
jazaa.
much.
Inshallah.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillah, itu dia perkongsian kita hari ini. Not to forget, nas'alullah ta'ala ayubarik lakum fi sihatikum wa amalikum wal umur, insyaAllah.
Amin. Thank
Wa
you very
natama
much.
bi liqa'il akhir fil mustaqbal qarib, insyaAllah. Hope to see you again.
Inshallah.
Tiba-tiba saya cakap
Inshallah.
Arab pula. Subhanallah. Baik. Kita harapkan dapat berjumpa lagi Syekha Tamara Gray di masa akan datang. Dan jangan lupa ke Facebook Rabata Malaysia untuk jadual perjalanan Syekha Tamara Gray di Malaysia sepanjang seminggu ini, insyaAllah boleh anda dapatkan di Facebook itu.
Mohon ampun dan maaf kalau terdapat salah dan silap kalau kita terbelit lidah cakap English ni. Fine tune tu, tapi apapun ini untuk kemaslahatan bersama, untuk kita faham bersama.
InsyaAllah.
Apa yang telah dikongsikan oleh Syekha Tamara Gray itu tadi, moga-moga memberi manfaat kepada kita semua dan boleh anda dengarkan ulangannya dalam jam 6 suku pagi hari Ahad nanti.
Ya, syukran ala husni istima'ikum. Ila liqa, insyaAllah. Sehingga itu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.